The last morning together came too quickly, the kind of morning that carried both sweetness and a sting. Maya woke before Elena this time, her eyes opening slowly to the pale light filtering in through the curtains. For a long while, she didn't move. She just lay there, watching the rise and fall of Elena's chest, memorizing the way her lips curved slightly even in sleep, how peaceful she looked in a world that had rarely given her peace. Maya wanted to stop time right then, to hold this fragile moment in her hands and never let it slip. But reality hummed faintly in the background, reminding her that outside these walls, life was waiting, and life was rarely kind. She shifted closer, careful not to wake Elena yet, and pressed her forehead lightly against her shoulder, breathing in the warmth that smelled faintly of comfort and safety. The thought of leaving it behind sent a dull ache through her chest. When Elena finally stirred, she turned and found Maya already awake, her dark eyes heavy with thoughts. "You've been up a while," she said softly, her voice rough with sleep. Maya tried to smile but it faltered. "I didn't want this to end," she admitted, her voice trembling. Elena reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, her touch steady. "It doesn't have to end," she said. "Not here. Not now. Not ever, unless you choose to walk away." The certainty in her voice soothed some of Maya's panic, but fear still curled at the edges. "What if I can't be brave enough out there?" she whispered. "It feels so easy when it's just us. But when it's everyone else, when it's the world, I don't know if I'll be enough." Elena didn't flinch, didn't let go. She leaned closer, her forehead pressing against Maya's, her words low but fierce. "Then lean on me until you find your strength. That's what love is. It's not about being fearless alone, it's about being scared together and still choosing each other." The truth of those words hit Maya deep, unraveling the wall she had been holding on to for years. Tears slipped down her cheeks, and Elena brushed them away with her thumb, not judging, not rushing, just letting her feel. Maya realized then that maybe bravery wasn't about standing tall all the time, it was about letting someone in when you wanted to hide. And in that quiet room, wrapped in Elena's arms, she understood that she didn't have to face the world in one leap. She could do it step by step. As long as Elena was beside her, they spent the last hours together with a tenderness that was almost sacred. There was no need for grand declarations or rushed promises. It was in the way they lingered over breakfast, Maya laughing shyly when Elena teased her about how much sugar she put in her coffee. It was in the way Elena reached for her hand in the hallway, their fingers brushing until they finally laced together, not caring if anyone noticed. It was in the silence of their walks, when words weren't needed because the closeness spoke louder. Every moment was layered with the knowledge that soon they would have to step out of the bubble they had built, but neither of them let that knowledge steal the present. When the time finally came to leave the hotel, Maya froze at the doorway, her bag slung over her shoulder, her eyes glued to the floor. The weight of fear pressed down again, heavier now that the safety of four walls was falling away. Elena noticed, as she always did, and gently took her hand. "Look at me," she said softly. Maya lifted her eyes, and Elena's gaze held her steady. "You don't have to go back to being who you were before. You get to choose who you are now. And I'll be here. Maybe not in this room, but in your life, if you'll let me." The choice was there, hanging between them. And for the first time, Maya didn't feel like she was standing on the edge of a cliff alone. She felt like she had wings, not because she had grown them herself, but because Elena was holding her hand and refusing to let go. As they stepped outside, the world looked different, brighter, louder, more daunting, but Maya found herself standing a little taller, walking a little steadier. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew this: she wasn't hiding anymore. She wasn't burying the truth of who she was, not when she had finally touched something real, something worth fighting for. As Elena walked beside her, their shoulders brushing, Maya felt a swell of quiet determination rise in her chest. She could face the whispers, the stares, the doubts, because for the first time she wasn't facing them alone. And with each step forward, she realized this wasn't an ending at all. It was a beginning, the beginning of a love that had already started to heal the pieces of herself she thought were lost forever. The morning after felt heavier than the night. The rain had stopped, but the city outside looked washed out, pale, almost as if the sky itself had tried to erase the traces of what happened between them. She woke slowly, her body aching, her skin carrying the memory of every touch, every desperate kiss, every mark left behind. The bedsheets smelled of her, that faint trace of perfume mixed with sweat and something rawer, something that couldn't be hidden. For a long moment she lay still, eyes closed, not ready to open them, because opening them meant facing the reality that the night wasn't a dream. It had happened. Every whisper, every plea, every wound, it was all real. And though her body throbbed with both pleasure and pain, her heart felt fuller than it ever had in her life. She turned her head slowly, her gaze falling on the woman lying next to her. She looked so different in sleep. The fire that lived in her eyes when they were awake was gone, replaced by a softness that was almost fragile. Strands of hair fell over her face, her lips parted slightly as if she was still whispering in her dreams. For a moment, she wanted to freeze time, to keep her like this, untouched by the weight of the world and the dangers of their love. She wanted to believe they could stay here forever, two souls hidden away from judgment, from fear, from the cruel eyes that would never understand what they shared. But deep down she knew, this world was not kind to people like them. Love like theirs was a rebellion, and rebellion always came with a price. As she lay there, she remembered the first time they talked about love, not in vague hints or stolen touches, but openly, honestly. They had been walking through the park at dusk, the trees bending under the wind, their fingers brushing but not holding. She had confessed then that she never thought she could belong to anyone, that her heart had always been too guarded, too afraid. And the woman beside her had smiled with a kind of sadness, admitting that she too carried scars left by a family that refused to see her truth, by a world that told her she was wrong for wanting what she wanted. That night, they promised each other something, never to hide from one another. No matter how much the world demanded silence, between them there would be only truth. That promise echoed now in the silence of the room, heavier than the air she breathed. Her chest tightened as she reached out, brushing the strands of hair from her lover's face, her fingers trembling. She thought about the marks on her own skin, the faint sting that lingered where passion had turned rough, where love had become something sharp and dangerous. And instead of regret, she felt gratitude. Because in those moments of surrender, she had given away the part of herself she had always kept locked away. It wasn't about pain or pleasure, it was about trust, about believing that someone could hold all of her without letting her break. She had never felt safer, even in the rawness of it. And that realization terrified her. To love someone this deeply was to risk everything, and she knew she had already crossed a line she could never return from. When her lover stirred awake, opening her eyes slowly, there was no shame between them. Only silence, heavy and fragile, like glass waiting to shatter. Their eyes met, and without speaking, they both knew the question that lingered: what now? Because passion was easy in the night, but morning brought clarity, and clarity could be cruel. She searched her lover's face for fear, for hesitation, for regret, but instead she saw only exhaustion and something gentler, something that looked like longing. It was then she realized that they were both standing at the edge of something bigger than themselves. To step forward meant giving up the safety of ordinary life, to fall into a love that could either save them or destroy them. They didn't talk much that morning. Words felt too small, too weak, for what lived between them. Instead, she let her head rest against her chest, listening to the steady rhythm of her heartbeat, trying to memorize it like a song she could return to when the world grew loud. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was full of promises unspoken, of fears they weren't ready to confess, of love too vast to be measured by language. And though the day outside was waiting, the responsibilities and fears pressed against the edges of their fragile cocoon, she wished for just a little more time. A little more time to exist in this place where nothing else mattered but the way their bodies had learned to fit together, the way their souls recognized each other even when they tried not to. As the sun climbed higher, the weight of reality pressed harder against them, and she knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. But as her lover's hand slipped into hers, holding tightly as if anchoring her to the moment, she felt a surge of determination. Maybe the world would tear them apart, maybe their love would be tested by cruelty, by whispers, by judgment. But in that fragile morning light, with their hands clasped together and the echoes of the night still burning in their veins, she knew she was ready to fight. Ready to fight for this love, no matter how much it hurt, no matter how much it cost. Because some loves weren't meant to be gentle. Some loves were meant to be storms. She had never felt time move so strangely as it did in the days that followed. Each moment with her was like stepping into a different world, a world where nothing outside their closeness mattered, and yet beneath it all she could feel a tension building, like a thread pulled too tight, waiting to snap. Their love was real, raw, undeniable, but it was also fragile in ways that frightened her. They shared laughter, quiet nights, stolen kisses in hidden corners of the city, but when she looked into her lover's eyes, she saw something deeper, a shadow, a heaviness that words never quite touched. It was the kind of pain that lingered even in silence, the kind of pain that made her wonder if love alone would ever be enough to heal them both. One evening, as they sat on the floor of her small apartment with half-empty glasses of wine between them, the truth finally began to spill out. She had asked softly about the scars she sometimes noticed, the ones not left by passion but by life itself, and at first her lover tried to brush it off with a shrug, as though the past were nothing more than a story that didn't need telling. But then, as the quiet grew heavier and the wine loosened her restraint, the words came. She spoke about rejection, about a family that had turned their backs the moment she dared to show who she really was, about nights spent wandering the city because there was no place she felt like home. She spoke about shame, about anger, about how hard it had been to keep living when every voice around her told her she was wrong for loving the way she loved. Listening, her chest ached with a mix of sorrow and fury. She wanted to reach into that past and pull her out, to shield her from every cruel word, every slammed door, every lonely night. But all she could do was hold her, wrapping her arms around her as if she could somehow absorb the weight of it all. And in that embrace, she whispered words she had never been brave enough to say before. She told her she wasn't broken, that she wasn't wrong, that the world had failed her but she would not. She told her she was loved, not just desired, not just wanted, but truly loved in the kind of way that had no condition, no boundary, no shame. That night changed something between them. It wasn't just passion anymore, not just bodies burning with need. It was a deeper kind of intimacy, the kind that came from bearing wounds instead of hiding them, from showing scars and trusting they would be kissed instead of judged. She found herself drawn closer not only to her beauty but to her brokenness, because within it was strength, resilience, a quiet kind of bravery that shone brighter than anything else. And as they lay together, not in hunger but in the calm after tears, she realized she no longer feared the risk of loving her. She feared only what life might do to pull them apart, but with that closeness came fear too, the kind of fear that creeps in when you finally have something to lose. The world outside their walls had not changed. There were still eyes watching, whispers waiting, a culture that demanded silence from people like them. Every time they walked together down the street, hands brushing but not holding, she felt the weight of it. She longed to be unafraid, to lace their fingers together boldly and let the whole world see, but her lover's gaze would harden, her jaw would tighten, and she would pull back just enough to remind her that safety still came before freedom. This contradiction tore at her heart. She wanted to shout their love from rooftops, to claim her in every way, but she also understood. She understood what it meant to live with scars, to know that visibility came with danger. Still, she couldn't help but feel the ache of wanting more, the ache of wanting to be hers in the sunlight as much as in the shadows. And yet, even in that frustration, her love only deepened, because every time she looked at her, she saw someone worth every sacrifice, every risk, every secret point. One night, as they walked home under a sky full of stars, she stopped and turned to her, her voice shaking with the weight of everything unsaid. She told her she didn't care what anyone thought, that she was tired of pretending, tired of hiding, tired of living a love too big to fit inside the shadows. Her lover froze, her eyes searching hers, torn between fear and longing. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, and the city seemed to hold its breath. Then finally, in a voice that trembled but carried truth, she admitted she wanted the same thing. She was just afraid of the cost. They stood there, two souls trembling between desire and fear, knowing that whatever choice they made next would change everything. And as she reached out, fingers brushing against hers, not pulling away this time, she felt the world tilt slightly. The decision wasn't fully made, the road wasn't yet clear, but in that fragile moment under the stars, she felt something stronger than fear, a promise, a spark, the first flicker of a fire that would not be silenced. She had never felt time move so strangely as it did in the days that followed. Each moment with her was like stepping into a different world, a world where nothing outside their closeness mattered, and yet beneath it all she could feel a tension building, like a thread pulled too tight, waiting to snap. Their love was real, raw, undeniable, but it was also fragile in ways that frightened her. They shared laughter, quiet nights, stolen kisses in hidden corners of the city, but when she looked into her lover's eyes, she saw something deeper, a shadow, a heaviness that words never quite touched. It was the kind of pain that lingered even in silence, the kind of pain that made her wonder if love alone would ever be enough to heal them both. One evening, as they sat on the floor of her small apartment with half-empty glasses of wine between them, the truth finally began to spill out. She had asked softly about the scars she sometimes noticed, the ones not left by passion but by life itself, and at first her lover tried to brush it off with a shrug, as though the past were nothing more than a story that didn't need telling. But then, as the quiet grew heavier and the wine loosened her restraint, the words came. She spoke about rejection, about a family that had turned their backs the moment she dared to show who she really was, about nights spent wandering the city because there was no place she felt like home. She spoke about shame, about anger, about how hard it had been to keep living when every voice around her told her she was wrong for loving the way she loved. Listening, her chest ached with a mix of sorrow and fury. She wanted to reach into that past and pull her out, to shield her from every cruel word, every slammed door, every lonely night. But all she could do was hold her, wrapping her arms around her as if she could somehow absorb the weight of it all. And in that embrace, she whispered words she had never been brave enough to say before. She told her she wasn't broken, that she wasn't wrong, that the world had failed her but she would not. She told her she was loved, not just desired, not just wanted, but truly loved in the kind of way that had no condition, no boundary, no shame. That night changed something between them. It wasn't just passion anymore, not just bodies burning with need. It was a deeper kind of intimacy, the kind that came from bearing wounds instead of hiding them, from showing scars and trusting they would be kissed instead of judged. She found herself drawn closer not only to her beauty but to her brokenness, because within it was strength, resilience, a quiet kind of bravery that shone brighter than anything else. And as they lay together, not in hunger but in the calm after tears, she realized she no longer feared the risk of loving her. She feared only what life might do to pull them apart, but with that closeness came fear too, the kind of fear that creeps in when you finally have something to lose. The world outside their walls had not changed. There were still eyes watching, whispers waiting, a culture that demanded silence from people like them. Every time they walked together down the street, hands brushing but not holding, she felt the weight of it. She longed to be unafraid, to lace their fingers together boldly and let the whole world see, but her lover's gaze would harden, her jaw would tighten, and she would pull back just enough to remind her that safety still came before freedom. This contradiction tore at her heart. She wanted to shout their love from rooftops, to claim her in every way, but she also understood. She understood what it meant to live with scars, to know that visibility came with danger. Still, she couldn't help but feel the ache of wanting more, the ache of wanting to be hers in the sunlight as much as in the shadows. And yet, even in that frustration, her love only deepened, because every time she looked at her, she saw someone worth every sacrifice, every risk, every secret point. One night, as they walked home under a sky full of stars, she stopped and turned to her, her voice shaking with the weight of everything unsaid. She told her she didn't care what anyone thought, that she was tired of pretending, tired of hiding, tired of living a love too big to fit inside the shadows. Her lover froze, her eyes searching hers, torn between fear and longing. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, and the city seemed to hold its breath. Then finally, in a voice that trembled but carried truth, she admitted she wanted the same thing. She was just afraid of the cost. They stood there, two souls trembling between desire and fear, knowing that whatever choice they made next would change everything. And as she reached out, fingers brushing against hers, not pulling away this time, she felt the world tilt slightly. The decision wasn't fully made, the road wasn't yet clear, but in that fragile moment under the stars, she felt something stronger than fear, a promise, a spark, the first flicker of a fire that would not be silenced. The days that followed their quiet confession under the stars were filled with a strange kind of electricity, as if every moment they shared was suspended between hope and fear. She found herself memorizing the smallest details, the way her lover's hand lingered a second longer when passing her a cup of coffee, the way her eyes softened when they caught each other across a crowded street, the way her voice lowered when she whispered her name like it was something too precious for the world to hear. They were still hiding, still cautious, but something had shifted. It was as if both of them had admitted that hiding could not be forever. The truth had been spoken, and once spoken, it was impossible to bury again. Yet with that shift came tension, unspoken but undeniable. The desire to step into the light grew stronger, pulling at her heart with every passing day, while the fear of what the world could do to them lingered like a storm cloud overhead. She tried to distract herself with work, with books, with the rhythm of daily life, but every thought returned to her. She remembered her laughter echoing down empty streets at midnight, her warmth pressed against her on cold nights, her strength in moments of silence. It wasn't just passion anymore, it wasn't just hunger. It was love that demanded more than stolen hours. It was love that wanted permanence. One evening, she invited her over for dinner. The table was set simply, candles flickering, the scent of warm food filling the small apartment. She had cooked nervously, her hands shaking as she chopped and stirred, wanting everything to be perfect, not because of the food but because of what she needed to say. When her lover arrived, the air seemed to shift the way it always did, the quiet gravity of her presence pulling her in. They ate, they laughed, they teased each other about burnt bread and cheap wine, but underneath it all her heart was racing with the words she was holding back. When the plates were pushed aside and the candles burned lower, she finally let the truth spill. She told her that she couldn't keep living halfway, that every moment of hiding felt like betrayal, not of the world, but of them. She told her that she didn't want to just be her secret, that their love deserved to breathe freely, to walk in sunlight, to be something they didn't have to bury in silence. Her voice shook as she spoke, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes, because she knew how much this meant, and how much it could cost. Her lover sat still, her face unreadable, eyes fixed on the candle flame as though searching for answers in its flicker. The silence stretched, and in that silence fear clawed at her chest, fear that she had pushed too far, too fast, fear that she would lose her. But then, slowly, her lover reached across the table, taking her trembling hands in her own. She spoke softly, her voice almost breaking, confessing that she wanted the same thing, that she had dreamed of it, longed for it, but that she was terrified of the pain it might bring. She told her about the cruelty of strangers, about the violence she had seen, about the rejection that still haunted her. She said loving her was the only thing that felt true in her life, but she was afraid of what truth would cost them in a world not ready for it. The conversation stretched late into the night, spilling past the edges of dinner and into the raw heart of who they were. They argued, they cried, they held each other tightly in moments when words failed. She admitted her own fears too, the fear of losing her, the fear of being invisible, the fear of watching their love shrink under the weight of secrecy. And yet through every tear, every shaking word, one truth kept rising above the rest: they loved each other. Fiercely, recklessly, completely. By the time the candles had burned down to nothing and the room was bathed only in the soft glow of the streetlight outside, they had made no clear decision, no final plan. But as they curled together on the couch, exhaustion softening the sharp edges of their conversation, she felt something shift again. There was no promise of safety, no certainty of what lay ahead, but there was a shared understanding that they could no longer live in half-truths. They might stumble, they might bleed, they might face a world determined to break them, but they would face it together. As she closed her eyes with her head resting on her lover's chest, listening to the steady thrum of her heartbeat, she realized that love had already changed them both. It was no longer something to hide or whisper about. It had become their strength, their defiance, their fire in the dark. And in that quiet moment, she knew with aching clarity that no matter how much it hurt, no matter how dangerous it became, she would rather face the whole world with her than spend one more day without her. The weeks that followed were not easy. Every day felt like a test, every glance from strangers like a judgment, every silence between them heavy with questions they weren't ready to answer. They tried to live as if nothing had changed, but everything had. Their love was no longer content with shadows, and that meant they were both carrying a weight that grew heavier with each passing day. At night, when the world was quiet and they were wrapped in each other's arms, it felt safe, unshakable, as if nothing could touch them. But the moment morning light returned, reality crept back in, whispering doubts, reminding them of the dangers that lurked just beyond the safety of closed doors. One evening they decided to take a small step forward. It was not a grand announcement, not a bold declaration, but something simple, a walk together through the city with their hands clasped. She had been the one to suggest it, her heart pounding as she spoke the words, her voice trembling as if asking for something forbidden. Her lover hesitated, eyes darting with fear, but then she nodded, whispering that she was tired of being afraid, tired of denying the truth of them. And so, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of fire, they walked side by side, fingers interlaced, hearts racing with every step. At first it felt exhilarating, almost unreal, as though they had finally stolen back something the world had been keeping from them. But then came the stares. A couple at a cafe turning their heads too quickly, a group of young men smirking as they whispered to one another, an older woman shaking her head in quiet disapproval. Each look was a dagger, each whisper a reminder that their love was not invisible anymore. Her lover's hand tightened around hers, her body stiffening, but she did not let go. She refused to. For every stare, for every whisper, she squeezed her hand tighter, as if saying without words, "We are real, we are here, we are not going back." By the time they reached the park, her lover's eyes were glistening with unshed tears. They sat down on a bench, her shoulders trembling as she tried to hide her emotions. For a long moment, she didn't know what to say. The air was thick with tension, the silence loud enough to drown out the sounds of the city around them. Finally, she turned to her, cupped her face gently, and whispered that she was proud of her, that every step they took together was a victory no matter how small. Her lover's tears spilled over then, and she leaned into her touch, admitting that she was scared, not of their love, but of the cruelty that always seemed to follow it. That night, back in the safety of her apartment, they held each other longer than usual, clinging tightly as if afraid the world might tear them apart the moment they let go. Their kisses were desperate, their embraces fierce, as though they were trying to carve their love into their very skin so that nothing, not even the weight of society's disapproval, could erase it. For the first time, they spoke openly about the future, about what it would mean to live honestly, about the possibility of building a life where they would not have to pretend. The idea filled them with both hope and dread. Hope because the thought of freedom was intoxicating, dread because the path toward it was lined with obstacles they could not yet see. In the days that followed, they tried again. A dinner together in a small restaurant where they didn't hide their closeness. A visit to the bookstore where they had first met, this time walking side by side without stepping apart when someone passed too close. Each time came with its share of stares, its share of whispered words they could not quite hear but felt deeply all the same. But each time also left them stronger, braver, more unwilling to go back to a life of silence. Every act of love in the open became a defiance, a rebellion, a reminder that their bond was worth every risk. Still, beneath the bravery was a current of fear that neither of them could fully ignore. Fear of rejection, fear of violence, fear of losing everything they had fought so hard to hold on to. One night, as they lay in bed, her lover admitted that she sometimes dreamed of leaving the city, of running away to some place where no one knew them, where they could start fresh without judgment. The thought was tempting, but she knew running would not erase the truth of the world. Love like theirs would always be questioned, always be judged, no matter where they went. And so she whispered back that they didn't need to run, they only needed to keep standing together, no matter how hard it became. It was in that quiet exchange, in the darkness of their shared space, that she realized their love had become something more than just desire or even companionship. It had become a fight, a cause, a declaration of existence in a world that wanted to silence them. They were no longer just two women in love, they were two women refusing to let that love be erased. And though fear still lingered like a shadow in the corner of the room, what they held in their arms was stronger, fiercer, more enduring. In her heart, she knew it would carry them forward, even if the road ahead was marked with blood, with tears, with battles they had yet to face. The turning point came on a night that began quietly, almost ordinary, as if the universe wanted to disguise what it was about to bring. They had gone out together, choosing a small cafe tucked away on a narrow street, a place where the music was soft and the lights were dim enough to make them feel safe. For a while it was easy, almost peaceful. They laughed, they shared bites of food, their hands brushing across the table in stolen touches that felt braver than usual. But safety is fragile, and it never lasts long for people who love in ways the world refuses to understand. The group of strangers entered the cafe, loud and careless, their laughter cutting through the soft music like glass shattering. At first, there was nothing unusual about them, just another group of people out for the night. But then one of them noticed the way their hands lingered, the way their gazes held too long. Whispers started, sharp and mocking, followed by laughter that wasn't the warm kind. The tension in the air shifted immediately. She felt her lover stiffen, her hand pull back slightly, fear flickering across her face. For a moment, she thought about retreating, about staying quiet to avoid trouble. But then she remembered the promises they had whispered to each other in the dark, the nights they had spent vowing not to hide. And something inside her hardened when the mocking words grew louder, when the laughter turned into taunts. She reached across the table deliberately, lacing her fingers through hers, holding tight. It was a simple act, but in that moment it felt like defiance, like fire. Her lover's eyes widened, a storm of fear and pride clashing in them, but she didn't let go. The group's voices rose, cruel words spilling like venom, but she refused to shrink. Her heart was pounding, her palms sweating, but she kept her chin high. The cafe grew quieter around them, other patrons watching, the air thick with tension. She wanted to scream, to demand why love between two women was treated as shameful, but instead she let her silence speak, her grip unyielding as if daring the world to tear them apart. It didn't come to blows, not that night. The group eventually grew bored, muttering under their breath before leaving with one last cruel laugh. But the damage was done. Her lover's hands were trembling when she pulled them into hers, tears threatening to spill but held back by sheer force of will. The rest of the night was quiet, their meal forgotten, their laughter gone. They walked home hand in hand, not speaking, the silence heavy with everything unspoken. It wasn't until they were back behind closed doors that the dam finally broke. She collapsed into her arms, shaking, her tears hot against her skin as she whispered over and over how tired she was, tired of being afraid, tired of fighting, tired of being treated like something less than human. Every word was a blade, cutting deep, leaving her with the helplessness of knowing she couldn't erase the world's cruelty. All she could do was hold her tighter, whispering back that she wasn't alone, that she never would be again. She promised her that love like theirs was worth every scar, every wound, every battle. She told her she would not let the world break her, not as long as they stood together. That night, as they clung to each other, their love shifted again, becoming heavier but also stronger. They realized then that the fight was not just about them anymore. It was about every woman who had been silenced, every soul forced into hiding, every love story crushed beneath the weight of judgment. Their pain was personal, but it was also part of something larger, something that stretched far beyond their own lives. And though fear still wrapped itself around them, something else began to grow in its place. Resolved, in the days that followed, they began to change the way they moved through the world. They no longer flinched at every stare. They no longer pulled their hands apart when footsteps approached. They still carried fear, yes, but they also carried pride. Pride in their love, pride in their survival, pride in the fact that they were still here, still holding on, still refusing to vanish into silence. They weren't naive, they knew more nights like that cafe would come, more cruelty, more danger. But they also knew that love was stronger than shame, stronger than hate, stronger than fear. Late one night, as they lay awake listening to the distant hum of the city, she whispered that maybe this was their purpose, not just to love, but to fight. Not with fists, not with anger, but with the quiet persistence of two people refusing to let their love be erased. Her lover turned to her then, eyes shining with something fierce, and kissed her as if sealing a vow. And in that kiss, in that trembling but unbreakable closeness, she felt it deeply. Love was not their weakness. Love was their rebellion, their strength, their fire in the face of a world that wanted them to disappear. The winter came suddenly, with a cold that seemed to seep into the bones of the city and settle in the cracks of every building. The streets were quieter, the nights longer, and yet for them, the chill outside only made the warmth they created together burn brighter. Their love had endured whispers, stares, and cruel words, but as the months passed, it was no longer just about enduring. It was about living, fully, even if it meant carrying scars. They found themselves leaning more into each other's presence, learning to read the silences, to recognize the fears that lingered behind every smile, to cherish the small moments that no one else would ever notice. Each morning, she woke with her lover's arm draped across her, and each night, she fell asleep to the sound of her breathing, a rhythm that calmed the storms inside her chest. But even within their cocoon of love, the outside world pressed harder. One afternoon, while walking together in the market, they heard it again, the sharp words, the mocking laughter, the voice that called them names meant to sting and shame. This time, it wasn't just strangers passing by. It was someone from her past, a familiar face she had once called a friend. The betrayal cut deep, deeper than she expected. The cruel tone wasn't just judgment, it was rejection, the kind that reached back into old wounds she thought had healed. Her lover saw the way her hands trembled, the way her breath caught, and she didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, her voice steady, her eyes blazing, and told him to leave them alone. The confrontation was brief, but the look of shock and anger in his eyes stayed with her long after he walked away. That night, she sat in silence, staring out the window, tears sliding down her cheeks. She confessed that part of her had always hoped the people from her past might one day accept her, that they might understand she hadn't changed, she had only learned to love honestly. But now, faced with the cruelty of someone who once knew her laughter, she felt the weight of reality again. Her lover pulled her close, pressing soft kisses against her hair, whispering that family and friends who turned their backs were never truly hers to begin with. She told her that love did not need the world's permission, that what they shared was stronger than any rejection. The words were a balm, and though the ache did not vanish, she clung to the truth within them. As days turned to weeks, they began to speak more openly about what they wanted, about the kind of future they could build together. There were nights filled with quiet dreaming, about a home filled with plants and books, about mornings spent in sunlight instead of shadows, about growing old side by side without fear. These conversations were tender, but beneath them lay a current of determination. They were no longer content with surviving. They wanted to live fully, to claim what was theirs without apology. Each whispered dream became a thread, weaving a tapestry of hope that neither of them could ignore. Their intimacy deepened as well, not only in the fire of passion but in the stillness that followed. She found herself bearing parts of her soul she had never shared before, the insecurities, the doubts, the fragile places she had always kept hidden. And her lover, in turn, opened wounds that had been locked away for years, scars that spoke of loneliness, betrayal, and survival. In those moments of raw honesty, they found not weakness but strength. They were mirrors for each other, reflecting both pain and beauty, and every confession only tied them closer. Yet the more they grew, the more they knew they could not stay quiet forever. The world around them was still loud, still cruel, still full of voices that sought to erase them. They had spent too long hiding in shadows, and while those shadows had once felt like safety, they were beginning to feel like cages. It was her lover who said it first one evening, her voice steady but her hands shaking. She said they could not keep living in fear, that love like theirs deserved more than secrecy, that perhaps it was time to step into the light fully, no matter what it cost. The words hung heavy in the air, filling the space between them with both dread and excitement. They knew what it meant. It wasn't just about holding hands in public or ignoring whispers. It was about declaring their love openly, about refusing to bow to silence, about claiming their place in a world that wanted them invisible. The decision was not made lightly, and it terrified them both. But as they sat together, holding hands, their hearts beating fast with the weight of the unknown, there was a quiet certainty growing inside them. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Later that night, as the wind howled against the windows and the city seemed to tremble under the weight of winter, she pressed her forehead to her lover's and whispered a vow. She promised that no matter what storms came, no matter how hard the road became, she would not let go. She would fight, she would bleed, she would endure, because their love was worth it. Her lover's eyes filled with tears, and she whispered the same vow back, sealing it with a kiss that was not desperate but steady, full of conviction. In that kiss, in that shared breath, they found their strength again. It was not the kind of strength born from never being afraid, it was the strength of choosing love despite the fear. And as they drifted to sleep in each other's arms, the city outside cold and unforgiving, they both knew that the next step would be the most difficult yet. But they also knew, with an unshakable certainty, that it was inevitable. Their love was no longer a secret. It had become a force too powerful to keep hidden, a fire that demanded to be seen. The day came not with thunder or warning but with quiet inevitability, as though the world had been leading them here all along. The city was alive with its usual rhythm, cars humming down crowded streets, voices rising and falling in 100 directions, yet she felt something different in the air, a weight and a promise pressing against her chest. They had talked for weeks, circling around the decision, weighing fear against longing, imagining every consequence. And now, there was no more space left for hesitation. They were done hiding. The choice was made, not in some grand declaration but in the steady way their eyes met that morning, wordless but certain, both knowing the truth without speaking it aloud. When they stepped out together, the world seemed sharper, every sound louder, every face clearer. Her hand brushed against hers as they walked, and for a second they hesitated, the ghosts of fear clawing at them both. But then she reached out, not with trembling but with conviction, and laced their fingers together. It was such a simple act, so ordinary, yet in that moment it was everything. It was rebellion. It was truth. It was love refusing to bow. Her lover squeezed her hand tightly, her jaw clenched as though bracing for impact, and together they walked forward, their hearts beating like war drums in their chests. The stares came quickly, just as they expected. A few curious, others sharp with judgment, some heavy with disapproval. A man muttered under his breath as they passed, his words dripping with venom, but they didn't let go. Another woman shook her head, eyes narrowing, but they walked on, shoulders squared, refusing to shrink. Every step was a battle, every stare a wound, but they had promised each other this moment, and promises were stronger than fear. When they reached the park, the place where they had once sat trembling with uncertainty, they stopped. The trees were bare, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching into the gray sky, and the air was crisp with winter's breath. She turned to her lover, her chest heaving with everything she had been holding inside, and in that instant she no longer cared who was watching. She reached out, cupped her face gently, and kissed her. It was not hurried, not hidden, not stolen. It was open, deliberate, a kiss that carried every wound, every dream, every ounce of defiance they had gathered over the months. And though she could feel eyes burning into them, though she could hear the whispers rising like static around them, she kissed her anyway, because this love deserved to be seen. For a heartbeat, time seemed to stop. Her lover's hands clutched at her waist, trembling but steady, her lips soft and unyielding against hers. The world blurred, the noise faded, and for that moment it was just them, two souls refusing to disappear. When they finally pulled apart, her lover's eyes were wet with tears, but they were not tears of fear. They were tears of release, of relief, of freedom. For the first time, she saw her without the weight of hiding, without the shadow of shame. And it was the most beautiful sight she had ever known. Of course, the world did not suddenly grow kind. They faced cruel words on their way back home, a man shouting insults that cut like blades, a stranger spitting near their feet, the heavy silence of those who chose to look away rather than stand beside them. Each act stung, but none of it broke them. Because for every cruel word, there was also the soft smile of a young woman who passed by and whispered brave, the quiet nod of a man who seemed to understand, the fleeting moment when humanity showed its gentler side. And in those small gestures, they found strength to keep walking. That night, back in the safety of their apartment, they didn't collapse into tears or tremble with fear. Instead, they sat together on the floor, their hands still entwined, their bodies pressed close, their hearts racing with both exhaustion and triumph. They spoke little, because words felt too small for what they had done. Instead, they simply held each other, breathing in the certainty that something had shifted forever. They had faced the world not as shadows but as themselves, and though the road ahead would be long and cruel at times, they had already won something priceless, the refusal to hide. As the hours passed and the night deepened, she thought about the journey that had brought them here. The chance meeting in the bookstore, the stolen kisses, the nights of whispered promises, the tears, the scars, the pain and passion that had shaped them. She thought about how fragile they had once felt, how easily they could have broken, and how, instead, they had grown into something unshakable. Love had bled, love had burned, but it had also endured. And now, it stood in the open, undeniable, unashamed. Before they went to sleep, she whispered into her lover's ear that she would never let her go, that no amount of hate or fear could take away what they had built together. Her lover whispered back that she believed her, that she was no longer afraid, not because the world had changed but because they had. They had chosen each other, chosen truth, chosen love over silence. And in that choice was freedom. As they drifted into sleep, the city outside still cold, still filled with voices both cruel and kind, she knew with a fierce certainty that their story was only beginning. The world might wound them, it might test them, it might try to erase them again and again. But love like theirs was not fragile anymore. It was fire. It was steel. It was a heartbeat that would not be silenced. And whatever the future held, they would face it together, unbroken, unafraid, and unashamed.